We have Kolin Kriitmaa speaking on mental performance. So Kolin is a certified mental performance consultant and holds a doctorate of education in sport and performance psychology. So he has a ton of experience working with athletes. He's the executive director for Canoe Kayak BC as well. So is heavily involved in the sporting world. And we're very excited to have him share his wealth of knowledge and experience with us tonight. So Kolin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks for the intro. Welcome everybody. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you have your cell phones handy, or your at least an iPad or a computer, maybe it's two screens. I do have some interactive things where you'll be able to answer some questions and they'll pop up on screen. But just to give you a little bit of an introduction, these are kind of what we're going to look at it from an agenda, just an introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about mental performance as a discipline and just introduce it. And then I'm going to give you a short applied mental model or tool that you can use when you're out training or competing. And then we'll just use a little bit of question and answer. So yeah, just to give you all a little bit of my background, you'll have to forgive me. Triathlon is not my main sport growing up or what I've worked in a ton of. I do have a cousin who I talk to quite regularly who's already competed or completed his second Ironman. So I do kind of have a few ideas on that side. I actually am a cyclist myself, do spend a little bit of time out on my road bike. So I do know a little bit about what's going on there. But my background, just so you'll know, is highly invested in hockey. That was a sport that I coached in, coaching as a profession for 10 years. I worked in the National Hockey League in the agency side and player development, athlete development, only to realize and recognize that mental performance was a missing piece or a gap in athletes at the time. And I went back to school to do my doctorate. But I'm going to show you a little bit about my approach to mental performance, which is rather unique. Most people think sports psychology or mental performance, you think just what's going on in your brain. I take a real different approach to it and include, the biology side and the sociology side to it, because I firmly believe that, when it comes to mental performance, if your body's not ready, it's going to be harder for your brain to be ready and vice versa. And I'll kind of get into that. From an education perspective, I have a physiology degree, a master of coaching science. I have my MBA and my doctorate in sport performance psychology. So that's a little bit of an introduction. So let's go on to the mental performance introduction, and feel free, although I'm not monitoring it just because I'm in a hotel room at the moment, feel free if you have any questions, just shoot them in the chat and we can catch up with them at some point. So the first thing I always like to do is ask people and throw some of these names up here. But what do all these people have in common? And the reality is everybody on the screen uses a mental person. Do you have famous athletes like Kobe Bryant or Jason Day here? Over here on the far right, although she lost last night to the United States or a couple nights ago, Marie-Philippe Poulin, who's been a stellar forward there for the Canadian hockey team. What I like to talk about is some of you may be familiar with Felix Baumgartner down here, the Red Bull guy who jumped from space. What most people don't realize is he worked extensively with a sport and performance psychologist before doing that jump, just to deal with fear, anxiety, and some different things. And when it comes to, although I do majority of my work in sport performance psychology, I have worked with some different performance related fields as well, like surgeons or air traffic controllers. If you think about it, what do we know about sports? Well, if you look at sports, you can read about the amount of failure in sports daily. Because if two soccer teams play, one team loses, that's failure. We hear about failure in sport, which brings on a lot of different things very regularly. But in performance domains like an air traffic controller or a surgeon, we don't hear about surgeries being botched and planes crashing as regularly as we do about athletes losing or not performing in sports. So sport performance psychology is more in the limelight, but it's the same principles that most people will use in life. So I would hope that by the time we're done here tonight, you can take away a couple of these ideas and concepts and apply them in everyday life as well. So what do we know about athlete development? So this is a model that I like to talk about quite regularly. And when we redefine athlete development, If you have the athlete in the center, here on the left, you've got in red, the body, and here on right, you have the mind. And I know it's kind of small, so I'll explain it all here, but down here in these bottom two squares, you have sport technical and tactical physical skills, maybe your periodization of your training and competition, nutrition, any sport science and testing, player health, like recovery, rehabilitation, managing load, some of those kinds of things. And all that's great. But what really is interesting is when you look at sport on the other side, you have the mind over here in gray. Here you have ethical intelligence, or developing character of athletes. You have emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation, learning style, knowing how athletes learn. Some athletes are more visual, some are more audio, some are more kinesthetic. And knowing how your athletes learn can always, or yourself, is always an important thing. I'm a firm believer in education and personal development. The better you, or the more you develop the person, the better you're usually going to develop the athlete. And then last but not least is just that sports psychology and social psychology type skills down here. So if you really look at it, you know, if you want to take an individual approach to develop the whole person in athlete development, and in order to do this, you got to train elements in combination. And so what I mean by that is, my favorite thing in my mental performance was, I like going to the gym with athletes and their strength and conditioning coaches. And, you know, can you train your brain or your mental performance while you're training your physical performance? The answer is absolutely. Because when you're out on, in this case, when you're out on the course in the final stages of the run, you're using your body, the physical, and you're using your brain all at the same time. So why don't we train them that way? Most people just train sports psychology in the classroom, and they train physical in the gym or out on the road running or on the bike, etc. So how do you train them in combination is always the big thing. So here comes one of those slides that you can see up here at the top, polev.com/KolinK001. You go to that URL, you should be able to answer this question, and your answer will show up on the screen. Don't worry, it's anonymous. polev.com/KolinK001. So there, we got somebody's already answered. polev.com/KolinK001. Low. Okay. Give it a moment here for a moment or two and see what everybody has to say. Okay, so we got a little bit of a mix of experience here with sport and performance psychology. And there you go. So keep that URL handy, everyone, because there's going to be some other questions here. We go on to the next question. Let's answer this one. How much of your sport is physical versus mental as a percentage? So is it 50 physical, 50 mental? Pick one of those options. 80 physical, 20 mental, 50-50. $70 physical, 30 mental. Okay. So the reality is, everyone, the true answer to this question, every sport is going to be different, but more importantly, every individual is going to be different. Because the reality is, the sport you're participating in, how well you do at it, or what makes you tick and how you operate within it, is up to you. Generally speaking, I find more athletes tell me that the mental game is larger than the physical. In this case, here with all of you tonight, we're picking physical a little higher, and that's great. But either way, here becomes my question for you. Let's just use this 40% one here. So let's just say in the off season, do you spend 70% of your time training physical and 30% training your mental? Or do you spend 100% physical and 0 mental? Therein lies why sports psychology becomes important in mental performance. So what is sport and performance psychology? I put this slide up, but I don't want you to read. All I really care about here is I want to make sure that if and when you need sports psychology help, you get to the right type of person to help you. So what we really care about here is up in the top in red. In psychology in Canada, there's really 3 types of disciplines. You've got educational psychology, or how you learn. Here's a bunch of different things: decision-making, emotional intelligence, habits. You have performance psychology. This is how you perform, right? This is how you have goals and use self-talk and mental toughness. And then over here on the far right, you've got clinical psychology. This is where diagnosed mental health disorders or illness comes in. Anxiety, depression, bipolar are some of those things as an example. And why I bring this up is critically important is I think a lot of people mistake these two on the left and lump them in with clinical psychology. And it's real, they are really different. The best way I can explain performance psychology is think of a hard subject in school like physics or calculus. You know that if you show up to the class and don't do any homework, you're probably going to get like maybe a C- or a D. You do a lot of homework, what happens? Well, you probably move up towards a B. You do a ton of homework, you get an A. But you know that you're never going to go from an A to an A plus and get that extra 10% unless you hire a tutor. Think of mental performance like the tutor. And so that's how mental performance fits into everything. Obviously, we're here because we want to learn about how to perform better, but I think it's critically important as well that we understand everybody, is fully aware that mental health is a very prominent topic these days, and getting to the right practitioner is something that's important. So when do you seek mental performance help? I recently saw this little slide and I loved it. I think a lot of people and a lot of athletes come to me and say, hey, Kolin, I have no confidence, or my confidence is low. And they come to me when something is wrong. They need to fix something. So usually, and if you look at this colorful graph, they have their performance is inconsistent, they're struggling, or maybe they're slumping. And what question I usually ask them is, are you being proactive with your mental training or reactive? Because if you're coming to talk to a sport and performance psychology professional and your performance is inconsistent, you're struggling, or you're slumping, chances are you're being reactive. If you're an athlete who's always in the zone and you have lots of confidence, you're probably being proactive and doing something a little bit better, or you have an insane amount of talent. But what happens when people catch up to you on the talent side? So many high performers only look to mental training when their performance is suffering, but long-term success requires a proactive approach. So here's a little bit about my ideas on models of mental performance and coaching. I like to call this a biopsychosocial approach. And what that really means is, from a biology perspective, sleep, hydration, nutrition, mental health, stress, and load management, all of those factors that are there on the body, they have a role in mental performance. When it comes to psychology, things like managing your thoughts and emotions, your mindset, focus and concentration, mental toughness, etc. That's the psychology side that people want to talk about. And last but not least, although I guess it's a little bit of a smaller area of triathlon, we've got that sociology thing. How do we react with our teammates, our training partners, maybe with our family, peers, etc.? And that's the sociology component of it. So when it comes to an athlete, what's your role in mental performance? Well, I think there's three scenarios here. You have to engage and learn some new material. You got to develop and learn from that material, and then perform it in practice or perform it in training and competition. So engagement, learning and development, and performing become three important things. So if I was to say, dial it back here for a moment and say, what are the three fundamental goals of a mental performance program? I think it's threefold. One is enhanced performance. You want to be better. Two is personal development. A thing you'll hear oftentimes in this mental performance world is growth mindset and personal development of always getting a little bit better every day. And then the last is just address that mental health and well-being. And what I think is super interesting, I always like to say to people, every human on the planet deals with their mental health every day. That doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It doesn't mean your mental health is perfect all the time, but it's on a spectrum and it goes back and forth. The reality is, if I was to ask the question to all of you, what's the one thing that makes your world tick, and you can deal with your mental health in the right way, what would that be? As an example, I can tell you all, for me, my mental health, the absolute thing that is the deal breaker for me is sleep. When I know I get 8 hours or more of sleep in a night, there isn't a problem in the world I can't tackle. When I get less than 8 hours of sleep, sometimes it's a challenge. And that's something you got to think about from a well-being perspective on a day-to-day basis. So if we keep going here, when it comes to mental performance, I believe that there's like 3 areas of mental performance. One is essential athlete education. The second is athlete wellness. And the third is one-on-one mental performance consulting. And I'm going to go through each of these in a moment and show you kind of what I mean here. So essential athlete education. You know, for many of us, we're young athletes just kind of breaking into the sport. What are all those little things that you just don't know yet? For example, sleep. If you're an athlete and you get 8 or more hours of sleep, you actually reduce chronic injuries. So pulled muscles, joint issues. You reduce those types of injuries 1.7 times. If you're getting north of 8 hours of sleep, you reduce the chance of infection. So getting sick, 63%. But what are all those little essential education things that as an athlete you need to learn? Well, here's a list of a few of them. You know, like how do you build resistance, deal with adversity, self-awareness, mental toughness, mindset, habits, self-care, rest, and recovery. And so I look at the first component of mental performance as what do athletes need to know to help them perform at their best? I also believe that there's 4 foundational concepts in mental performance: managing emotions or managing your thoughts and emotions, your mindset, the difference between focus and concentration, and mental toughness. A lot of people think focus and concentration are the same thing, but they're really not. Focus is like a short period of time. Think of like 60 seconds or less. Concentration is something over a long period of time, something highly applicable in the sport of triathlon. I won't go through too much of this here, but these are just some different models of these topics that we go through and look at in sport and performance psychology when I'm working with athletes. All part of this is this top point of that triangle of essential athlete education. So the second component of athlete wellness here is really putting together an athlete wellness model. Like, what is your well-being model? And I look at 4 things when I'm talking with athletes about athlete wellness. Number 1 is load management. Most people think load management, they think the physical load on our bodies. But the reality is load management can be much more. It can be the physical load on you, but it can also be the psychological or mental load that's on you. You think of those times when your body feels good, but you're just mentally drained. And then the third, which is very applicable for triathlon, is mechanical load. Mechanical load is that regular chronic stress and pounding. So think of when you're out out running and your feet are pounding on the pavement. If you have overuse injuries, what happens? Runners often get stress fractures. That's a mechanical load thing. So how do you manage those 3 different types of load in order to be at your best at any given time? Second component here is mental health. We've already kind of touched on that. Personal development and life skills. I think I talked about that in the athlete development model. And then last but not least is this thing down here in the yellow or orange or whatever, yellow, I guess. And that's chronic stressors. What are those everyday little things that just kind of chip away at your well-being? I often have athletes that are teenagers say, my mom or my dad tells me to take out the garbage all the time. It's always harping on me. Chronic stressor. I'm not so sure that's a stressor, but you all kind of get the idea. Homework often comes up as a chronic stressor too. So personal wellness strategy. I put these two football players up. For those of you who don't know who they are, the top one is Tom Brady. Tom Brady just at last year at 46 years old, retired from the NFL. This is actually the cover of his book called the TB12 Method. And what Tom Brady has done is he's actually written and created a method of how he was able to play football for 20 plus years into his 40s. Down below is Russell Wilson, who plays for the Denver Broncos, used to be with the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson came out in the media a couple of years ago and said that he figured he had a maximum of a 10 to 12 year career. He makes $35 million a year and he spends $1 million or 3% of his wage on his personal well-being strategy. He has his own nutritionist. He has his own cook. He has his own strength and conditioning coach, his own mental performance coach, own physiotherapist, massage therapist, and some of these people travel with him on the road. So if you really think about it, what are you doing for your personal well-being strategy? And then that third point of that triangle is just that whole notion of one-on-one mental performance consulting. And so if you look at this little diagram, don't worry about what's on it. You'll get the point here, but it looks like a house. And the whole point here is, excuse me, we have some core foundational skills, those athlete wellness or habits or emotional management, whatever they are. That's the foundation of the house. You can't put walls up before you have a foundation. Then you can see here, it looks like we have 3 walls. We have our basic mental skills, our preparation mental skills, and our performance mental skills. The reality is you can't be preparing and performing at the same time. So you want to be able to know which of these mental skills you need to use for the given situation. And it's important to understand all these. And then up top, we have your team skills, culture and leadership and communication and some of these things. So there's an old Japanese parable about the home builder, the house builder. And he's this very skilled house builder. He builds custom homes, these beautiful custom homes that go for millions of dollars. Works for 25 years for this developer. And eventually he says to the developer, I'm retiring. And the developer says, okay, I'd like you to build, you've worked so well for me for so many years. I'd like you to build one more house. And the home builder is like, I don't know, I'm just not into it. But okay, he agrees to build the one more house. Builds the house, does that for the first time in his career. He does a half-assed job of building the house. As soon as he's done, the developer and his boss throws him the keys and says, thanks for all the homes you built for me all those years. Here's your house. And so the moral of the story is if you're going to build your own house, you want to build a house you're proud of. You don't want to build a half-assed house. So that's why I put this slide in here as a little bit of a house, because how do we build our mental performance house? And that's something that athletes need to have in their back pocket and in their toolbox. So over the last 5 or 7 years that I've been doing this, I've kept a list of every time an athlete came to me and talked about their performance breaking down. And it is always 100% of the time one of these 10 topics, whether it's transition to a new level they're competing at or confidence issues, readiness to return from injury or stress management. It is always one of these 10 topics. And so those are areas that we often look at in mental performance with athletes as places to start when athletes are struggling with a few things. Mental performance has changed a lot over the last few years, especially through COVID. It used to be a discipline where people would come to my office, let's sit down and talk. It's changed a lot of drastic things. We've developed a performance app, which you can see here on the left. It tracks sleep and hydration and all these kind of different things. This is a case study here with a junior hockey team we worked with. And I know it's very small, so I'll just tell you what it says. But over the course of the year, we were able to increase the team's sleep 27%. We were able to increase their hydration 60%. Some other statistics, their nutrition went up 24%. And my favorite one was their stress went down 6% despite competing. This was a team that lost in a national championship game. Mental Performance has really done a lot of work of late online, and this is our online academy where we have resources for athletes and a way for them to communicate and different things. Here's some other tools we use with the mental health model, some video, movement science to understand prehab and rehab type routines. And that's what mental performance is in today's day and age. So that gives you a little bit of info on the first part of the presentation, just introducing the topic of mental performance. So here's the question you can all answer. What has been your biggest learning or takeaway from that presentation so far? Breadth of the topic. I like that. And it is a very wide topic. Need to get more sleep. Train the brain, not just the body. The importance of mental training along with physical. Okay. Lots of good stuff there. Let's keep going on. So the second part of this presentation, I wanted to give you all a takeaway tool and one that I think is, I personally believe this is 50-60% of the battle with most athletes. But how do you manage your thoughts and emotions? When you're out on the course running or on the bike, you got a lot of time to think and a lot of time to have emotions, dealing with various different things. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea. What I like to talk about with athletes is mental models. And the reason I say that is this: if you think about a social studies test or a math test, what happens is the teacher has a rubric or a way to grade the test. And what you do with that rubric is it's a way to think through the problem of the math problem. So what I want to do today is give you a little bit of a mental model on how you manage your thoughts and emotions and how you can use it to enhance performance. So here's the reality. If you think of thoughts, it's a two-dimensional process. So I know that not everybody here is driving yet, but think of if you pulled up to a four stop signs on each corner of the road. Your objective was, I need to turn right when it's safe. Your thought is, I'm going to stop at the stop sign. When it's safe, I'm going to turn right. So you have a thought, turn when it's safe. Your action or your behavior is turn. Nobody's really emotionally attached to that. It's safe, so away you go. But the moment you have emotions get involved, it becomes a three-dimensional thought process. Now you have a feeling, you have a thought, and then there's an action or a behavior. So think about a time when you're out training, you're on a run or out in the pool or out in the lake or the ocean for your swim, and you're thinking, I can't do this anymore. My body feels terrible. Now you have a feeling and a thought. Does that make you give up? Does that make you push through? What happens? And so the moment that emotions get in the way, it becomes much more difficult to think about. So if you look at the emotional continuum, you can go all the way here from sad, angry, scared, surprised, happy, excited, and you can even break all these emotions down into significantly more things. The reality is, when you're out in competition, you don't have time to think through all these emotions, and nor would I or anybody really expect you to. So what we need to do is have a way to think through this emotional stuff and our thoughts in a different way. And I'm going to show you how. So the first thing we want to talk about, though, is what are the signs of stress? Well, everybody on the planet is going to have physiological or things with your body that when you start to get stressed, something happens. So, increased heart rate, your breathing increases, you get tense muscles or sweaty palms. There might be others, but those are some of the four common ones. Like I always say to people, when I'm playing golf, my heart rate increases and my muscles get tense. And when my heart rate gets too high, my muscles get too tense, the ball doesn't usually go into the fairway, it goes into the bush, right? So give a moment to think about what physiological signs of stress do you feel when you get a little bit stressed out. On the other side of the coin here, you have psychological signs of stress. These would be things mentally that start going on, like feeling embarrassed, worried you're going to let yourself down or others down, worried people are going to judge you, those types of things. Okay. So the reality is everybody's going to suffer at some point from some sort of physiological or psychological signs of stress. What we now need to understand is how to deal with that. So the realities of pressure. I often like to ask people, what's the difference between stress and pressure? More often than not, stress is external. Think of COVID. Nobody had any control over that. So that was stress from an external factor. Pressure, on the other hand, is usually what you put on yourself. So you can have negative pressure above you, pushing you down, or positive pressure behind you, helping you. And a little bit of pressure often helps us find the answers faster. So the question begs, can we unlock and enhance performance under pressure? The answer is absolutely, if you can control your thoughts and emotions. So here's the most important slide of the day. If you don't remember anything else in this little tool and this mental model, please remember this one. 2 or 3 ways of thinking, I should say, about managing your thoughts and emotions. First, we have the red zone. In the red zone, this is where you get emotional. It's a fast action response. Your heart rate increases, your breathing increases, you get fired up. Okay. This is usually, like I said, the emotions are high. Over on the other side, we have the blue zone. This is your ability to think, solve problems, plan, but this is also where you overthink. It's a slow acting response system of the body, and it's because you're thinking. Then we have the neutral zone. This is where you're in flow state or peak performance. You're calm, cool, collected, relaxed. Your arousal or how psyched up you are is just right. You're motivated, committed, detailed, and you have confidence. So if you have too much red zone, you're hot-headed, your emotions take over and you make bad decisions. If you have too much blue zone, you overthink, you get stuck watching or making mistakes. So what's the goal? Play in the neutral zone. So now think about this. If you're out on a ride one day and your thoughts start to wander, you ask yourself, am I in the red or the blue? Oh, I'm in the blue. Okay, I need to get back to the neutral zone so I can train at my peak. Same situation in a competition. You're out in the swim, and oftentimes the swim in triathlon starts early in the morning. Someone kicks you the wrong way because you can't see anything. Now you're fired up and mad because someone just kicked you. How do you get back to the neutral zone to focus back on your stroke and your swimming? I'm going to show you how. So how do you stay in the neutral zone? The reality is you got to treat your emotions and thoughts in two dimensions. One is energy and one is pleasant or unpleasant. So if we start with this pleasant versus unpleasant side of things, think about this. Remember that big long list of the emotional continuum I showed you? Happy, sad, angry, scared, whatever else. Instead of thinking through that list, if you have a feeling, you're out in the swim, someone kicks you in the swim, ask yourself, is this pleasant or unpleasant? Clearly, if you got kicked, it would be unpleasant. How do you get over that unpleasant emotion and feeling? Create high energy. Focus on your stroke. You know what? They kicked me. I'm going to pass them here in the swim. Now you're in this quadrant up here, and away you go. What happens if you are in this, out on the course running, and you have an unpleasant feeling of getting tired? It's probably dragging you down. That's creating low energy. You stop at a hydration or a nutrition station, boom, you get a little bit of something in you, and it helps you to create some higher energy as you continue on down your journey. So the whole notion of labeling your emotions as pleasant or unpleasant and how do you create high energy will always overtake those negative emotions and help get you back to the neutral zone. So if we think about it here, we've got 4 mental skills to stay in the neutral zone, and I'm going to show you just these 4 quick mental skills. The first one is goal setting, or go back to your goals. Focus on the process. What are your process-oriented goals? I would imagine that, in running in a triathlon or swimming, it's about stroke rate, maybe on the bike, keeping a good cadence of your pedal strokes. That's your process. And if you focus on the process of what you need to do, it will help you reach those goals. So if you go into the neutral zone, the blue zone, now you're focused on something else. You're not focused on your process. You need to go back to the neutral zone by reaffirming your goals, reaffirming that process. Same with the red zone. The second mental skill is self-talk. So the first question we have to ask ourselves on our self-talk is this positive or is this negative? The reality is the human brain has 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those thoughts are negative. And of the 80% of negative thoughts, 93% of those thoughts are the same thought. What does that tell us? That tells us that we're more negative than we are positive. And if we're that negative, what happens when you're out on the run? What happens when you're out on the bike? If you're being more negative, it's going to be harder to get through that race. It's going to be harder to get out of the red zone or the blue zone and into the neutral zone. So if a problem occurs, you get a flat tire out on the bike, you got to reframe the problem. This is my opportunity to, do something unique. So if you focus on the problem and have a problem mindset, when you get that flat tire and have to quickly change your bike tire, if you focus on the problem, it's going to impact everything. You're going to be in the red zone or the blue zone and you won't be able to get out. You focus on the challenge. Hey, I need to change this tire in 4 minutes or less. And so I only lose 4 minutes of this race. And if you take on the challenge with a challenge mindset and accomplish the challenge, you're going to increase your confidence really fast. In fact, it's the number one way to build confidence is to accomplish challenges. So reframing or reappraising your self-talk and going from a problem mindset to a challenge mindset is the second mental skill to go from the red to the neutral or the blue to the neutral. Lastly is relaxation, the centering breath. I probably don't need to explain to all of you here in this sport how important breathing is. I'm sure you've been taught a number of breathing techniques that help you. One technique that I like to use with athletes when they go to the red zone is the centering breath, which is a slow, deep breath in, pause at the top, release tension on the breath out. Often this works in sports like hockey or football or rugby, basketball, when you have the ability for 15 seconds to breathe in, breathe in for 7 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, breathe out for 6. But there's many different breathing techniques. And I would imagine that some rhythmic breathing would probably be equally as important in this sport of triathlon. But your ability to relax. Think about when you're in the red zone, you need to relax to get to the neutral zone. When you're in the blue zone, you might need to relax in order to refocus. Then the last one here is refocusing, your ability to reset your focus. So if you're in the blue zone and you're overthinking something, how do you get back to that neutral zone? The question I like to ask here is, think of a time when you read a chapter of a book and you finished that chapter and thought to yourself, I have no idea what I just read. I guarantee it's happened to everybody because it's happened to me many times. If you get to that position where you're finding yourself not focused because you're overthinking about something in the blue zone, there's a technique called grounding. So if you think about what you see, smell, hear, taste, and feel at this moment in time, you just focused on 5 things instead of what was keeping you stuck in the blue zone. So there's 4 mental skills really quickly that can help you stay in the neutral zone at any given time and not be in the red, not be in the blue. So 4-step recap of our little mental model. Ask yourself, are you in the red zone or the blue zone? Is this a pleasant or unpleasant feeling or emotion? Is this creating high or low energy? Or how do I create high or low energy? Which mental skill do I need to use, or mental skills? Because we go back to that last slide, oftentimes athletes need to use two or 3, maybe even 4 of those mental skills to go from the red to the neutral or the blue to the neutral. So what mental skill do you need to use? You got to reaffirm your process goal, reappraise the situation, relax and take a breath, or ground yourself so that you're more focused. So there you go. Quick little mental model, red zone, blue zone, managing your thoughts and emotions. So 3 questions for you. First and foremost, what was new in this presentation that you learned today? What was new that you learned today? What was new that you learned today out of this presentation? Okay, breathing exercises. Framework for dealing with negative emotions. Managing stress. Okay. Solutions aren't often simple, but can be effective. Yeah. Concept of the neutral zone. Okay. Staying neutral. High, low, pleasant, unpleasant. I like that. To me, that's one that I use all the time. Okay. So you kind of all get the idea. So next question. What in this presentation was old or something you already knew? What was something that's old or something you already knew? Mental skills. Okay. The red zone is not helpful. Yeah. The importance of process goals. Very little, maybe breathing. Okay. Stress is not pressure, and that mental skills or mental health and sleep are key to increasing confidence. Definitely. Last question. What in today's presentation are you curious to learn more about? When I ask this question, I'd often say this too. Think about it this way. Not just what you're curious to learn, but what are you curious to apply from what you learned today and see how it works. Therein lies the real true answer. But what are you curious to learn more about? What are you curious to learn more about? Okay. Confidence and outcome dependency, grounding exercises, regaining focus, transition from the run. I like that. That's interesting. Mental side of training, reducing negative thoughts. How to be able to recognize what zone you're in. Okay. So lots of good questions. So any questions or anything that people have? Happy to let yourself unmute yourself and we can answer any of those questions.